I always thought betrayal would come with warning signs, raised voices, slammed doors, a coldness that crept in slowly, giving you time to prepare. But when my world fell apart, it happened in a single afternoon, as sudden and sharp as a slap. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, when my husband, Mark, walked in and told me he wanted a divorce. No preamble, no apology, just the words, flat and final, hanging in the air between us. I remember the way the spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the side of the pot. I remember the way Mark wouldn't meet my eyes, how he stared at the floor as if the pattern of the tiles could explain away the years we'd spent together. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I could manage was a whisper. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shrugged, still not looking at me. "I'm not happy," he said. "I haven't been for a long time." I wanted to argue, to remind him of the life we'd built together, the house we'd bought, the vacations we'd taken, the quiet evenings spent curled up on the couch, but I could see in his face that it was already over. Whatever love we'd shared had been replaced by something colder, something I couldn't reach. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, the familiar world tilting into something unrecognizable. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and awkward silences. Mark moved into the guest room, and we tiptoed around each other like strangers. I tried to hold on to some sense of normalcy, cooking dinner, watering the plants, paying the bills. But every time I looked at him, I saw the distance in his eyes, the way he flinched when I reached for him. I wondered if he was already seeing someone else, but I was too afraid to ask. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. One evening, I found a text message on his phone, a message from a woman named Rachel, full of inside jokes and whispered promises. My hands shook as I scrolled through their conversation, the words blurring together in a haze of disbelief and anger. When I confronted Mark, he didn't deny it. He just sighed, as if he were tired of pretending. "I love her," he said simply. "I want to be with her." I felt something inside me break, a sharp, clean snap that left me hollow. I wanted to hate him, to scream and throw things, but all I could do was stare at him, numb and silent. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold determination. "I want you to move out," he said. "Rachel and I want to start our life together here." The words hit me like a punch. Our house, my house, was suddenly no longer mine. I had spent years making it a home, painting the walls, planting flowers in the garden, filling it with memories. And now he wanted to erase me, to replace me with someone new. I felt a surge of anger, hot and wild, burning away the numbness. "No," I said, my voice steady for the first time. "I'm not going anywhere." Mark's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that," he said, turning on his heel and leaving me alone in the kitchen. I stood there for a long time, staring at the pot of soup, the steam curling into the air. I realized then that I was done being the victim. I was done letting him decide the terms of my life. The next morning I called a lawyer. I gathered every document I could find. Bank statements, mortgage papers, receipts for every improvement I'd made to the house. I made copies of everything, storing them in a folder labeled just in case. I started keeping a journal, documenting every conversation, every slight, every threat. I was determined to protect myself, to fight for what was mine. The divorce proceedings were ugly. Mark and Rachel made no effort to hide their relationship, flaunting it in front of friends and neighbors. I became the subject of gossip, the woman who had been replaced, the wife who wasn't enough. I tried to ignore the whispers, to hold my head high, but it was hard. Every time I saw them together, laughing in the garden I had planted, I felt a fresh wave of humiliation and rage. But I refused to let them win. I threw myself into the legal battle, working with my lawyer to ensure that I got my fair share. I learned about the value of the house, the investments we'd made, the assets we'd accumulated over the years. I discovered that I was entitled to more than I'd realized, that I had rights and options. I started to see the divorce not as an ending, but as a chance to reclaim my life. Mark underestimated me. He thought I would roll over, accept whatever scraps he offered. He didn't know the strength I had found in the ashes of our marriage, the resolve that had taken root in my heart. I negotiated hard, refusing to back down. I demanded my share of the house, my share of the savings, my share of the life we had built together. In the end, the settlement was generous. I was awarded half the value of the house, a portion of Mark's retirement fund, and enough cash to start over. But the real victory came when I realized I didn't want to stay in a place that had become a monument to betrayal. I wanted a fresh start, a new beginning. The day the settlement was finalized, I walked through the house one last time. Every room was heavy with memories, some sweet, some bitter, all of them tinged with the knowledge that this chapter of my life was closing for good. I ran my fingers along the banister Mark and I had painted together, paused in the kitchen where I'd spent countless evenings cooking meals for a man who had already left me in his heart. I stood in the garden, the one I'd coaxed into bloom year after year, and let the sun warm my face. I thought about the woman I'd been when we bought this house, hopeful, trusting, believing in forever. I grieved for her, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. She was gone, but in her place stood someone stronger, someone who had survived. Mark and Rachel wasted no time. The day after the papers were signed, she moved in. I watched from my car as she carried boxes up the front steps, her laughter echoing through the open windows. Mark hovered around her, eager and attentive, as if he could erase the past by pretending it had never existed. I felt a pang of anger, but it was quickly replaced by something colder, more calculating. They thought they had won. They thought they could build their happiness on the ruins of my life. But they had no idea what was coming. I had spent months preparing for this moment. While Mark and Rachel were busy playing house, I was quietly cashing out. I sold my share of the house to Mark at the highest possible price, leveraging every improvement I'd made, every dollar I'd invested. I liquidated my portion of our joint savings, transferred my retirement funds, and closed every account that had both our names on it. I made sure every penny I was owed found its way into my own hands. I even took the time to remove my name from the utility bills, the insurance policies, the subscriptions, every detail, every thread that tied me to that house I severed with surgical precision. The day I left, I didn't say goodbye. I packed my car with the things that mattered. My grandmother's quilt, the photo albums, the books I'd collected over the years. I left behind the furniture, the dishes, the trappings of a life that no longer belonged to me. I drove away without looking back, the weight of the past lifting with every mile. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, nothing fancy but mine. The first night, I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and let myself cry. Not for Mark, not for Rachel, but for the years I'd lost, the dreams I'd buried, the woman I'd become. I cried until there were no tears left, and then I slept, deeply and peacefully, for the first time in months. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. I bought new furniture, painted the walls in colors that made me happy, filled the space with plants and light. I started going to yoga classes, joined a book club, reconnected with old friends. I discovered a freedom I hadn't known in years, the freedom to make my own choices, to live on my own terms. I realized that I didn't need Mark or anyone else to define my worth. Meanwhile, things at the old house began to unravel. Mark had stretched himself thin to buy me out, draining his savings and maxing out his credit cards. The mortgage payments were higher than he'd anticipated, the bills piling up faster than he could pay them. Rachel, who had imagined a life of comfort and ease, found herself scrubbing floors and clipping coupons, her dreams of domestic bliss quickly fading. The cracks in their relationship began to show, small at first, then widening with every argument, every disappointment. I heard about their troubles through the grapevine, neighbors who couldn't resist sharing the latest gossip, friends who still felt loyalty to me. I listened with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I didn't wish them harm, not really. I just wanted them to understand what they had done, to feel the consequences of their choices. One afternoon, I received a call from Mark. His voice was strained, desperate. "We're struggling," he admitted. "The house is too much. We can't keep up with the payments." I listened in silence, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to gloat, to remind him of the way he'd tossed me aside, but I resisted the urge. Instead, I simply said, "I'm sorry to hear that, Mark. I hope you figure it out." I hung up, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. As the months passed, their situation grew worse. Mark lost his job, the bills mounted, and the bank began sending foreclosure notices. Rachel, who had once looked at the house as a prize, now saw it as a burden. Their arguments became public, their misery impossible to hide. Eventually they were forced to move out, leaving the house empty and abandoned, a monument to their failed dreams. I drove by one day, just to see it for myself. The garden was overgrown, the windows dark. I felt a pang of sadness for what had been lost, but also a sense of vindication. I had survived. I had rebuilt. I had taken back my power. In my new life, I found joy in the smallest things: a cup of coffee on a quiet morning, a walk in the park, the laughter of friends. I learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own strength. I realized that sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Freedom, I discovered, is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or grand gestures. It slips in slowly, like sunlight through a half-open window, warming the coldest corners of your soul. In months after I left Mark and Rachel behind, I learned to savor that freedom. I woke up each morning with no one's expectations but my own. I could eat breakfast at noon, dance in my living room, or stay up late reading without worrying about someone else's schedule. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. I started to notice things I'd forgotten to appreciate: the way the city lights sparkled at night from my apartment window, the taste of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, the simple pleasure of choosing a new book and getting lost in its pages. I filled my days with small rituals: watering my plants, writing in my journal, calling my sister just to hear her laugh. Each act was a reminder that I was still here, still capable of joy. My friends rallied around me. Some had drifted away during my marriage, lost in the shuffle of couples' dinners and Mark's endless work events. But when they heard what had happened, they reached out, inviting me to dinners, movie nights, and weekend hikes. I was hesitant at first, unsure if I belonged in their world of inside jokes and shared memories, but they welcomed me back without question, their warmth a balm for my wounded heart. One evening, as we sat around a table at my favorite Italian restaurant, my friend Julia raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she toasted, her eyes shining. The others joined in, their voices blending in a chorus of hope. I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. I wasn't alone. I had a tribe, a family of choice who saw me for who I was, not who I had been. Work became another source of strength. I threw myself into my job, taking on new projects and responsibilities. My boss noticed my renewed energy, praising my creativity and dedication. For years, I had let my career take a backseat to Mark's ambitions, always putting his needs before my own. Now, I was determined to shine. I signed up for professional development courses, networked with colleagues, and even started mentoring a new hire. With each success, my confidence grew. But healing isn't a straight line. There were days when the loneliness crept in, when the silence of my apartment felt oppressive. There were nights when I lay awake, replaying old arguments, wondering if I could have done something differently. Sometimes, I missed the comfort of routine, the familiarity of a shared life, but I reminded myself that comfort isn't the same as happiness. I had chosen truth over illusion, freedom over captivity. One Saturday, I decided to treat myself to a day at the art museum. I wandered through the galleries, letting the colors and shapes wash over me. In one room, I found myself standing in front of a painting of a woman standing alone in a field, her face turned toward the sky. There was something in her posture, defiant, hopeful, that resonated with me. I stood there for a long time, letting the image sink in. I realized that I, too, was learning to stand alone, to face the world with open eyes and an open heart. As the seasons changed, so did I. I started dating again, cautiously at first. I met people for coffee, for walks in the park, for dinners at cozy restaurants. Some dates were awkward, others forgettable, but a few were genuinely enjoyable. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the quiet voice inside me that knew what I wanted and what I deserved. I promised myself that I would never settle again, that I would never let someone else's needs eclipse my own. One evening, I met a man named Daniel at a friend's birthday party. He was kind, funny, and easy to talk to. We spent hours sharing stories, laughing over childhood memories and favorite movies. There was no pressure, no rush, just two people enjoying each other's company. We exchanged numbers, and over the next weeks, we went on a handful of dates. With Daniel, I felt seen, respected, and valued. He listened when I spoke, remembered the little things, and never made me feel small. I told him about my past, about Mark and Rachel, about the pain and the betrayal. He listened without judgment, his eyes full of empathy. "You're incredibly strong," he said softly. "You didn't just survive, you rebuilt." His words touched something deep inside me, a place that still ached from the wounds of the past. I realized that I was ready to let someone in, to risk my heart again. But I also knew that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else. I had built a life I loved, a life that was mine alone. Daniel was a wonderful addition, but he wasn't the foundation. I was. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet, to trust myself, to believe in my own worth. Looking back, I saw how far I had come. I remembered the woman who had stood in her kitchen, stunned by her husband's betrayal, unsure if she would ever feel whole again. I wanted to reach back in time and tell her that she would survive, that she would thrive, that she would find joy in places she never expected. Freedom, I realized, is not just the absence of chains, it's the presence of possibility, the courage to choose your own path, the strength to start over. I had lost a marriage, a house, a version of my future, but I had gained myself. As the first anniversary of my divorce approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The pain, the anger, the sense of betrayal, they were still there, but they no longer ruled my days. Instead, I felt a quiet pride in how far I'd come. I had built a new life from the ashes of the old one, and every day I grew a little stronger, a little more certain of who I was. I decided to mark the occasion not with sadness but with celebration. I invited my closest friends over for dinner, filling my apartment with laughter, music, and the smell of homemade lasagna. We toasted to new beginnings, to resilience, to the power of starting over. Julia brought a cake with "To Freedom" written in bright blue icing, and as we ate, I realized how much love surrounded me. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. After everyone left, I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. I thought about Mark and Rachel, about the house that had once been my whole world. I wondered where they were now, what lessons they had learned. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a distant, almost gentle sadness for the people we had all been. I hoped they had found their own paths, that they had learned something from the wreckage we'd left behind. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mark. The handwriting was familiar, but shaky, as if he'd hesitated over every word. He apologized for the way things had ended, for the pain he'd caused. He told me that he and Rachel had split up, that the house had been sold at a loss, that he was starting over in a new city. "I hope you're happy," he wrote. "You deserve it." I read the letter twice, then tucked it away in a drawer. I didn't need his apology, but I appreciated it all the same. It felt like the final page of a chapter I was ready to close. With that closure came a new sense of possibility. I started taking risks, saying yes to things I would have once avoided. I signed up for a painting class, even though I'd never held a brush in my life. I traveled to a city I'd always wanted to visit, wandering its streets with nothing but a map and a sense of adventure. I volunteered at a local shelter, helping women who were rebuilding their own lives after loss. Each new experience added a layer to my confidence, a reminder that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined. Daniel and I continued to see each other, our relationship deepening with time. He encouraged my independence, celebrated my successes, and stood by me during the inevitable setbacks. We talked about the future, about dreams and plans, but there was no pressure, no rush. We were two whole people choosing to walk side by side, not out of need, but out of genuine affection. One evening, as we walked along the river, Daniel stopped and turned to me. "You know," he said, "I've never met anyone as brave as you. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into a new beginning." I smiled, feeling the truth of his words. "I didn't have a choice," I replied. "It was either give up or fight for myself. I chose to fight." He squeezed my hand, his eyes warm. "And you won." But the real victory wasn't in what I'd gained, it was in what I'd learned. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to a house, a marriage, or anyone else's approval. I had learned that I could survive heartbreak, betrayal, and loss, and come out the other side stronger and wiser. I had learned that happiness was something I could create for myself, one small step at a time. I started sharing my story with others, first in small ways, conversations with friends, posts on social media, quiet encouragement to women at the shelter. The response was overwhelming. People reached out to thank me, to share their own stories of loss and resilience. I realized that my experience, painful as it had been, could be a source of hope for others. I began volunteering as a mentor, helping women navigate the legal and emotional challenges of divorce. I listened to their fears, celebrated their victories, and reminded them that they, too, could rebuild. The more I gave, the more I healed. I found purpose in helping others, in turning my pain into something useful. I saw the ripple effect of kindness, the way a single act of support could change the course of someone's life. I realized that I was no longer defined by what had happened to me, but by what I chose to do with it. As the seasons turned again, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. My apartment was filled with light and laughter, my days with purpose and possibility. I had built a life I loved, a life that was mine alone. I knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear, but I also knew that I had the strength to face them. One night, as I stood at my window watching the city below, I thought about the journey I had taken. I thought about the woman who had been left behind, who had been told she wasn't enough, who had been replaced and discarded. I wanted to reach back in time and tell her that she would be okay, that she would find her way, that she would not just survive, but thrive. I smiled, feeling a quiet joy. I had cashed out, yes, I had left them both homeless, but I had found a home within myself, and that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. The second year after my divorce began with a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. I woke up each morning grateful for the quiet, for the gentle routines I'd built, for the woman I saw in the mirror. Someone I barely recognized, yet finally understood. My scars were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were simply proof that I had survived, that I had chosen myself when it mattered most. I started journaling every morning, a habit that became a kind of meditation. I wrote about my dreams, my fears, the small joys that filled my days. I wrote about forgiveness, not just for Mark and Rachel, but for myself. I forgave myself for staying too long, for doubting my worth, for the times I'd put someone else's happiness before my own. With every page, I felt lighter, more free. One afternoon, I received a message from Rachel. It was short, almost hesitant. She apologized for her part in what had happened, for the pain she'd caused. She told me she was starting over, too, and wished me happiness. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. In the end, I simply wrote, "I hope you find peace." And I meant it. I realized that holding on to anger only kept me tied to a past I was ready to leave behind. That summer, I traveled alone for the first time. I booked a ticket to the coast, rented a small cottage, and spent my days walking along the beach, letting the waves wash away the last remnants of sorrow. I watched the sunrise each morning, the sky painted in colors I'd never seen before. I felt small and infinite all at once, a part of something larger than myself. I realized that happiness wasn't a destination, it was a series of moments, strung together by the choices we make. Back home, I continued to mentor women at the shelter, sharing my story and listening to theirs. I saw myself in their eyes, the fear, the uncertainty, the hope. I told them what I had learned. That it's possible to start over, that it's okay to let go, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what no longer serves you. I watched as they found their own strength, as they rebuilt their lives piece by piece. Their courage inspired me, reminded me that healing is a journey, not a destination. Daniel and I grew closer, our relationship deepening with each passing season. We supported each other's dreams, celebrated each other's victories, and weathered the inevitable storms together. There was no drama, no games, just honesty, respect, and a quiet, steady love. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be truly seen, to be loved or exactly who I was. On the anniversary of the day I left my old house for the last time, I returned to the neighborhood. I parked my car down the street and walked past the house, now owned by strangers. The garden was wild, the paint on the front door faded, but I felt no sadness, no regret. That place was no longer mine, and I no longer wanted it to be. I had built something better, something real. As I walked away, I thought about all the women who had been told they weren't enough, who had been left behind, who had been forced to start over. I wanted to tell them that it's possible to rise from the ashes, to turn heartbreak into freedom, to find joy on the other side of loss. I wanted to tell them that they are stronger than they know, braver than they believe, and more deserving of happiness than they can imagine. I returned home to my apartment, my sanctuary, and sat by the window as the sun set. I thought about the journey I had taken, the battles I had fought, the victories I had won. I thought about the woman I had become, resilient, compassionate, unbreakable. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was ready for them. If you're listening to my story, if you've ever been betrayed, abandoned, or forced to start over, I want you to know this: you are not alone. You have the power to rebuild, to reclaim your life, to create a future that is yours alone. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Stand tall, speak your truth, and never, ever settle for less than you deserve. I was left with nothing, but I found everything. I cashed out, walked away, and built a life that is richer, fuller, and more beautiful than I ever imagined. And if I can do it, so can you.